Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Name and Nature of Poetry. Our talk tonight begins with the question, what is a poem? It is a puzzling, even at times exasperating, yet always intensely exciting question. I don't have the answer. For some 25 years now, it's been my good luck to have lived with poetry almost daily, trying to learn how to write it, how to read it, to teach it, to write criticism about it, to edit it, and to talk with fellow poets about the art. And yet, as the years pass, so does the caution, if not often skepticism, grow when I meet some allegedly comprehensive definition of what is a poem, whether given by a surrealist or a beat or a gray flannel poet, or by a critic or by an English professor. The kind of inclusive definition which arrives as if spoken ex cathedra and is being handed down to the faithful in some critical papal bull. Even before I'd read much verse, however, and what little that had been read was often poorly understood, or in some embarrassing cases, it turned out, grossly misunderstood. There were those rare times when while reading a particular line or a stanza or a whole poem, or when hearing it read aloud, when all of my attention was suddenly totally engaged and put immediately to work, as it were, in an experience of the poem that can only be likened to what one feels like when one realizes that he has fallen in love. One particular memory has survived a quarter of a century. I am sitting in the worn leather armchair in the small, cramped Harriet Monroe Modern Poetry Reading Room at the University of Chicago, a room which overflows with tall shelves housing all of the volumes by the modern poets and most of the little magazines and the record albums of spoken verse that any young poet could ever wish for. Narrow medieval leaded windows are open to the scene outside. The trees, with their yellow leaves, are none or few. The gray Gothic buildings, the occasional watchful gargoyle, the overcast, warm, gray early winter sky. I am wearing big, awkward earphones, listening to someone called Cecil Day Lewis recite in a clipped, precise Oxford accent the final stanza of a poem signed in class, but whose meaning has eluded me. The poem is Sailing to Byzantium by William Butler Yeats. The last stanza reads, "Once out of nature I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold or gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come." The lines hit me in the gut, and for good. What they meant was still obscure, but that they were great was as evident as the trees and the buildings outside framed by the narrow windows. And over the years, the answers to our question, what is a poem or what is poetry, that have made the most solid sense to me are answers such as Emily Dickinson's rapturous confession that when she was reading some poem and felt that the top of her head had just been taken off, then she knew that it was the genuine article, that it was poetry. Or there's that famous remark made by A.E. Housman, who, if anybody, knew all the classical and modern definitions of poetry. Indeed, the late Kennedy Professor of Latin at Cambridge University was called the first scholar in Europe. Hausman, late in his life in 1933, said that if he were shaving his sideburns in the morning and a line of verse floated through his head, making his whiskers stand alert so that he nicked his skin with the razor, then he knew that the line was a line of true poetry. Or to share a final answer, this remark made by Rainer Maria Rilke in a letter written in 1903 to a young poet named Franz Xavier Koppes. Rilke wrote, "Works of art are of an infinite loneliness, and with nothing to be so little reached as with literary criticism. Only love can grasp a work of poetry and hold on to it and judge it fairly." And so in attempting to understand the question, what is a poem or what is poetry, we will try to avoid tangling with either a comprehensive critical definition or a roster of remarks on the art of poetry made by poets and critics, ancient and modern. In so doing, we will be trying to avoid, when talking poetry, where all is pristine, totally natural, miracles everywhere, we will be trying to avoid what Alexander Pope called, with his customary waspish bite, the gentle art of sinking into dullness and pedantry and smug pretension. In short, that classroom where all is stale, unnatural, boredom everywhere. Instead, we'll look at a handful of some of the loveliest poems in all the world. The first is actually only a fragment of a poem. It was written some 2,500 years ago in Greece by a mercenary soldier who came originally from Thrace. His name is Archilochus, and all that's known about him is that in a battle once he surrendered a beautiful shield that he had and fled like Falstaff on the plain of Shrewsbury, saving his skin, discretion being the better part of valor. And also, there's the ancient legend about Archilochus, once in the pay of the army of Sparta, and while there he fell in love with a Spartan maid, whose father happened to own extensive olive groves. The old man objected strenuously to Archilochus' courting of his daughter, refusing to sanction any match between them. So the soldier poet wrote some electrifying and scurrilous verses, claiming that the relationship between the father and all of his 3 daughters was something more than filial. In fact, it was as incestuous as the Theban tyrant who married and bedded his own mother. And as Archilochus was reciting his poem in the marketplace of Sparta, much to the delight and jeers of the crowd that had gathered around him, the father, distraught and red as a ripe tomato with embarrassment, rushes up to Archilochus and promises that the poet can have the hand of his daughter after all, and also a good piece of the olive groves, if only Archilochus would promise never to write another poem about him or any of his daughters. Now there's a tale all poets love. Every poet wants his words to have such immediate and magical effect. And here then is the fragment by Archilochus, which was fortunately salvaged from the ruins of history and preserved for posterity in a textbook by one of the ancient grammarians. The fragment is a phrase, dear heart. That's D-E-E-R, dear heart, the heart of the lady. One assumes it is a lady. Her heart is like a deer. Isn't that a miraculous image? The heart of his beloved is gentle, shy, and quick to flight as a deer flickering in the sunlight and shadows of some wood in Arcady. And here's a short poem written by Li Po in the China of 700 A.D. One of that handful of the great poets of the world, Li Po is a giant of a man, with a voice, the legend tells us, that sounded like the cry of a peacock. He was born in the west of China, near the great Gobi Desert, and spent his 20s with several other young poets, drunk and reciting verses to each other in the green mountains of the west. Li Po was also a master swordsman and an archer, and he had a good knowledge of military tactics. And so in his 30s, one of the great Khans appointed him as Secretary of War. Legend has him bedecked in official robes, laughing for days throughout some official holiday, and then at banquet, sitting beside the emperor, Li Po would recite one of his odes in his piercing peacock voice. Then, drunk, he would insist that the court eunuch undress him and carry him off to bed. Or he'd be seen holding hands at court with his lover, a young Chinese poet. Li Po also fathered many children and took to bed 4 wives. Later, in his 40s, he tired of the life of the courts and left to wander writing poems all over China for 10 years. At a time when other poets put a premium on exquisitely scriptured manuscripts of their verses, Li Po, who wrote an estimated 5,000 poems, would often dash off an ode or a song, then fold the paper on which the poem was written into the shape of a toy boat, which he'd then launch on the river, waving it farewell. As it sailed away, he would say joyfully, into eternity. Still later, Li Po held other important political positions, and he would from time to time startle some conference attended by the Khan and his advisors by announcing, "Last night I wandered into the fields outside the city and spoke again with my old friends the angels." Legend tells us that at the end, Li Po was enjoying the hospitality of some friend, some admirer of his, on the latter's pleasure boat upon the Yangtze River, when, over the waters one night, came the sound of indescribably lovely music. The music was the singing of 2 youths who were traveling in the backs of dolphins over the waters in the moonlight to the boat, and took Li Po away with them into the heaven of the sages and the poets. Here then is the poem. If you ask me, why do you live up on the green mountain, I'd smile silently. My soul is serene. The peach blossoms drift along the waters. There is another heaven and earth beyond the world of men. What makes this poem so haunting and beautiful in my mind is that magical tension created by the discrepancy in the last 2 lines. The peach blossoms drift along the waters, and there is another heaven and earth beyond the world of men. The lovely image of those peach blossoms can suggest and conjure up a sense of the ineffable beauty and poignancy of our own brief transitory lives. We are here in this spectacular world, so full of beauty everywhere, for such a little time. Only yesterday we were children chasing dragonflies in the fields beyond the house, and here today we feel the damp, bone-hard, fell hand of death, who's come in through the open window from the bitter rain that falls outside. Contrasted to this image of the beauty of our transitory lives is that mysterious assertion which comes as a sharp, almost electrifying surprise. There is another heaven and earth beyond the world of men. If the line had merely been a pious hope claiming a heaven after this life, then the poem would have been a good but hardly a great lyric. Instead, Li Po tells us without philosophical explanation or logical argument that there is both another heaven and another earth, another world with grass and rivers and peach trees waiting for us, and that it's always there, as permanent as the drifting peach blossoms are transitory. Chinese scholars agree that this celebrated last line about the new heaven and the new earth has its roots in the Tao philosophy which Li Po embraced. I'm not competent to comment on what the Taoist meaning may be here. All I know that ever since I first read the poem, it was left written on the blackboard of a poetry workshop I've been trying to teach at Circle Campus, left as a gift to the young student poets by Bill Knott, who'd come one Saturday morning in 1969 to visit us and talk a bit about the art of writing poetry. Ever since that first reading, the poem has never failed to enchant, astound, and illuminate me in ways that I have few words to describe. The next pair of poems will need no critical comment at all. They are meant to be heard by the heart alone. The first is a song written some 200 years ago by a tenant farmer in southwestern Scotland, who may have composed it as he did so many of his other songs and odes while he was ploughing with his oxen in the fields or while harvesting the oats or winter wheat. Critical comment at all. They are meant to be heard by the heart alone. The first is a song written some 200 years ago by a tenant farmer in southwestern Scotland, who may have composed it as he did so many of his other songs and odes while he was ploughing with his oxen in the fields or while harvesting the oats or winter wheat. The poet is, of course, Robert Burns, of whom his devoted wife Jeannie Armour tells us in the only recorded remark of hers that has come down, "Or Robbie should have had twa wives." This poem will tell us why. It is called Bonnie Leslie, and if I may, I'd like to dedicate the reading of this poem to my own wife, Mary Rose. The term Caledonia in the poem is one of the old names for Scotland. "I saw ye Bonnie Leslie as she gae o'er the border. She's gay like Alexander to spread her conquests further. To see her is to love her, and love Niles forever. The devil abune would look into her bonny face and say, I canna harm thee. Return again, fair Leslie, return to Caledonia, so that we here may brag we hae a lass, there is na again so bonny." And our second love poem was written by William Butler Yeats in his youth when he was a handsome, dreamy black Irish poet singing of the Celtic twilight. The lyric is the famous song so often put to music, Down by the Sally Gardens, and in all likelihood it was addressed to the spectacularly beautiful young revolutionary Maud Gunn, whom Yeats loved in despair all of his life because she would never marry him. The poem was published in 1889 when Yeats was 24. Down by the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow-white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the tree, but I, being young and foolish, with her would not agree. In a field by the river my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she laid her snow-white hand. She bid me take life easy as the grass grows on the weirs, but I was young and foolish, and now am full of tears. And next I'd like to read a poem which, in the opinion of some critics, is probably the finest ode ever written. Its author is the celebrated poet Anonymous. I proposed to Ida, Ida she refused. Ida won my Ida if Ida used Burma shave. Poetry like love can also be a lot of fun.